We are back. It's the Joe Holka Show presented by FanDuel. Stream number 2 for the brand until Pat McAfee and I build a DFS lineup live on his show one day. We all can dream. 3 key takeaways for week 2, but I'm not alone. Thankfully, you guys know him from Sportsgrid, the Taekcast, the Swolecast, Davis Mattek. How we doing, my man?
You know, we're not doing as well as we were last Monday. Late swapping into the nuts last Monday. Not enough Cooper Cup, and by that I mean 0 Cooper Cup yesterday. Not really any particular reason. I wasn't going into the slate saying I don't want to play this guy. I just ended up not going in that direction. I felt real sharp utilizing all of the late swap angles and certainly got to use the late swap angles, but not in the direction that I thought I was going to get to use them.
It was a weird week, man, because I was in the same boat. Like, everyone with a pulse basically identified Cooper Kupp as like one of the standout wide receiver plays on the slate. Honestly, like, if he would have been in the second half of the games, we probably would have been all over Cooper Kupp. But for whatever reason, it got into my head that I just couldn't play this guy in the early games because I needed to basically be flexible the rest of the way. And I think we probably could have achieved that by still getting the Cooper Kupp information early. I was like you. I decided not to do that, and it was a very, very painful start to my day. Had some decent late swaps, but honestly didn't really have a team that was super live outside of a Derrick Henry, savior team that just min cash. So pretty rough week 2 for me overall. But I guess it sucks to be on something like Derrick Henry at low ownership when he just goes completely nuts and really just not benefit from it a ton. I guess where is more of your action these days, Davis? Is it more cash games still than GPPs? I know you guys are doing more GPP stuff on the Gilcast now, right?
Yeah, I mean, so I don't have like a hard and fast rule. I post my games on DraftKings, and then if I get plenty of invites, like if I'm getting into soft games or if I see some no badgers or there's like a good 3-man, like I'm just gonna keep entering games or whatever. And then I know the tournaments that I'm gonna do every single week. Like I play I'm mostly single entry and 3-max stuff. Like I have not MME'd yet this year on DraftKings. Doesn't mean I won't. And on FanDuel, FanDuel single entry offerings are really good. They have good payout structures. I actually think that's something FanDuel does really well. Like I think it's a $40 single entry they have where like 10th place is still like it's like 10% of first or whatever. Like it's really, those are some of the best tournaments on FanDuel. So that I kind of have my set GPP action where I don't go over that. And then if the action's good, I will keep getting into games for cash and stuff, but don't have like a set allocation.
Yeah, it actually didn't used to be that or like that with FanDuel. There was a while that DraftKings definitely had better structures. It was flatter. There was at least a 2x min cash is something that I try and target in GPPs. FanDuel has some smaller fields that I like to play also. It's just a lot flatter than it even was like a year or 2 ago. So definitely focused on that. If you're watching this right now, I'm sure you guys already know, but we do have a listener league. It's a rake-free $5 3-max contest, 2,000 person field size. So a little bit bigger than some of the smaller fields that we talk about, but definitely the best structure that you would ever find on FanDuel. So FanDuel.com/Holka to get into that one. Make sure you get in there before it fills. Davis, let's talk through something that I know is probably very close to your heart. I know you're a Chiefs fan. I know you're a Cowboys fan and a Chiefs fan, but we're going to talk through your Chiefs fandom today. What was going through your head with the Clyde Edwards-Helaire stuff last night on Sunday Night Football, man? Because it just can't be good for the CEH shares overall.
No, yeah. So, like, obviously, I have all these best ball teams with Clyde Edwards-Helaire. Darrell Williams scores the 1-yard touchdown, but apparently people were telling me on Twitter that CH was in the medical tent. So it's like, okay, that's not optimal, but whatever. Where I'm at with CH now is like, I don't know. Are they even gonna play him anymore? Like, is this gonna be like Rashad Penny for the Seahawks, where they're just like, okay, we spent the first round pick on you, but you're just not any good, and so we're done playing you. Like, is Bo Scarborough gonna sign as a street free agent for the Chiefs and start tearing it up? Like, is Isaiah Crowell gonna end up on their roster? Are they gonna trade for Melvin Gordon? Like, it feels like Andy does this every year. He adds like some dusty old vet to the roster in the middle of the season, and that guy ends up getting touches. Le'Veon last year, LaShawn McCoy the year before. So all that stuff is pretty bad, but it's it's a bummer for CH, who I think is like unplayable at any price in DFS right now. You could argue though that Mahomes and Tyreek and Kelsey are actually going to benefit from this because the team we're about to talk about, the Buccaneers, they've had 5 plays inside the 5 this year. All of them have been throws. And I feel like that's the direction we're headed in with the Chiefs, where they're just like, we do not care. We are going to be like the 2020 Bills. We are throwing the ball 65% of the time. And like, you just got to deal with it.
I don't know if I can let it slide that you're on the first name basis with Andy Reid. That's pretty awesome. Just we just know what Andy's gonna do now. But dude, the CEH stuff, especially after that fumble, it's possible that he's just buried for forever now. It's just like one of those things that like a team this good, obviously they do all of these things to the offensive line to completely revamp the protection for Patrick Mahomes. But man, you got to have some ball security back there, especially with the game on the line like that. You could see that the Ravens, like it was like such a big like weight off of their shoulders to beat the Chiefs and just beat them in prime time. So I think it's going to be an interesting thing to walk through just the running back situation for Kansas City the rest of the year. So really tough. I agree with you in DFS. I don't know if we can go back to that at this point. It was looking like such a great situation for best ball and season long because we're all drafting this guy 2 years ago in the first round, and now you could get him in like the back half of the second, early third at points of this year. Where were you taking him in best ball? Because I mean, even now at that point, it's not even looking as so hot.
No, I mean, yeah, I was taking him in the 3rd round after that wide receiver tier break. So after Justin Jefferson, AJ Brown, and CeeDee Lamb went, I was like, all right, cool. We can press the button on Kittle here sometimes. We can press the button on Clyde here sometimes. And it's looking like I should have just taken Amari Cooper every single time instead of trying to get those. Yeah, it's not very good for CH. I mean, it's a bummer. Like I want everything to work out for the Chiefs, and I want them to be the most fun offense in fantasy football. And I mean, I guess we saw some Pringle and some D-Rob last night. You know,
That
Patrick
had to have
Mahomes
been good
taking
for you.
yeah, taking care of our 18th round selections. I mean, literally, like got a touchdown for all the 18th round guys. Got one for Daryl, got one for D-Rob, got one for Pringle. So can't complain about that, but can definitely complain about the CH stuff.
Man, that was probably the most like frustrating single game slate that I've had in quite some time because literally every value play got there that you possibly could have played. So it basically turned into who was your captain? Did you have a Kelsey captain? Did you end up having a Tyreek captain? And that was the difference in your team. I had some really good Tyreek teams in terms of all the value stuff around it. It's just a tough scene, man. Tough game overall. I have to move on from that just mentally, just because it's going to drive me crazy. So the second thing we're going to talk about today is the Tampa Bay Bucks, and we discussed this a little bit on the show with TJ Hernandez last week on the Pivots video, so definitely check that out later in the week again. But man, it just feels like people avoid these types of offenses because they don't know which guy to pick, when the real answer might just be to onslaught this team, right?
Yeah, I mean, yeah, literally, and also like the thing that people feel we are so risk averse, so people feel uncomfortable like picking the wrong one. Like I swapped to Antonio Brown yesterday. He gets 1 catch for 17 yards. Like okay, sometimes you eat that, but sometimes you swap in a Gronk at like 6% owned and he breaks the slate, and like you just have to. I mean, we know in general we're going to lose on a lot of these slates anyways. Like we know like probably 80% of the time we are going to be returning negative dollars to our accounts, and like you just got to be comfortable living with those losses, which I'm pretty numb to it at this point. Like yesterday was a little bit more tilting than the average one because I like didn't feel like I was drawing live once on the slate, and sometimes there are losses that are more heartbreaking than others. But I mean, if they're just going to throw this many passes and be this efficient, and it's kind of one of those things where it's like a little bit different for seasonal fantasy because Brady still actually has the same amount of fantasy points as Jalen Hurts, who has thrown 2 touchdowns. Did he throw 2 in week 1? Because the rushing is the great equalizer. But for DFS, where especially on FanDuel half PPR, where like Gronk only caught 4 passes, Mike Evans only caught 5, but the touchdowns are the all-important variable there. And so I do think the Brady double stacks on FanDuel, I would guess, are just going to be underowned relative to like the leverage that we do at Daily Roto. Like I would guess he is going to project as like a really good leverage play along with the Buccaneers wide receivers almost every single week.
Yeah, and it's one of those things too. It's kind of hard to click Brady just because of the price and the guys that he's around that are providing that ceiling on the ground and that floor that they get. So Brady, Matt Ryan, Aaron Rodgers, those guys that really just aren't going to give us a ton overall with their legs. That's such a hard thing to click. But like you said, man, just how efficient this offense has been. They're going to be a good team. I think that just like you fall into this trap of avoiding these offenses that are spread out with all of these really good weapons, and then it just kind of paralyzes you at times, and then you don't play any of them, and doesn't mean that individually they're not good plays. What do we do with Gronk, man? Like normally, like I get to this point of the year, and I guess last year I had a nice Gronk cash like very early on in the season, so I guess never had to think about it again. It was like the best thing ever. But now, like back-to-back weeks, Gronk's looking good, he's looking healthy, Brady's clearly looking for him. We obviously know that the touchdowns matter, so I don't know, man. What do we do with Gronk? Tight end's the worst.
I mean, I think you ship it until he starts to physically slow down a little bit. Like when I go work on our projections this week, I am gonna give Gronk a larger target share, and the main thing is I'm gonna give him like an 8% TD rate or something. Like I'm gonna ship his TD rate way up because they are not running at the goal line. They're like I just said, they have 5 plays inside the 5. All of them were passes. 2 go to Mike Evans, 1 goes to Godwin, 2 go to Gronk. And I mean, I just feel like as long as Gronk is healthy, Gronk even before all of this. So like you really zoom out on Gronk's career, he's the best touchdown producer ever, like more than Randy Moss, more than Jerry Rice. Like this guy was better at creating touchdowns than anyone else ever. So I guess it's not that surprising to see him with his legs back under him being this good at creating touchdowns.
Yeah, and at least it's somewhat predictable in this offense. Like, like the very specific roles that these guys have. Like, even Mike Evans last week, like, you know that he's going to get those deep targets, 9 targets, but he had almost 50% of the team's air yards. So that's something that we can obviously see coming. Godwin, he's probably the most matchup proof of all of these guys, but then Gronk could easily just come in and steal all the touchdowns. So at least you know what you're getting into. And if you really don't want to make that decision, just play some Bucks Onslaught. Seems like an easy game. Let's talk a little bit more about late swap though, Davis, because this was like the perfect week. Obviously, it's set up really well with almost all of the high total games being in the afternoon. Trying to get a little bit different in the afternoon or in the morning. Sorry, it's set yourself up to play those Dak Prescott, Herbert stacks, whatever it was of that game. Seemed like a good strategy, and it definitely worked in some ways too. We had a couple tilt space teams that were live with that exact same strategy, but you whiff on a guy like Cooper Kupp at 35%. Some of these contests, like you're definitely in a scenario where you have to get weird, and you have to get weird really fast. So I guess what was your process like? I guess the results weren't great for either of us, but I was pretty happy with some of the ownership that I got on swaps at least.
Oh, I was ecstatic with some of the things I swapped into. I mean, DeAndre Hopkins was 3% owned, as like, I think probably one of the best plays of the slate. I swapped into some Kyler teams. Unfortunately, I did like the most un-Mattek move ever. I swapped into a Kyler, Justin Jefferson, DeAndre Hopkins team with AJ Green as the third wide receiver instead of Rondale Moore, which is like the most me thing to do ever. I've been arguing with Andrew Barron, who works on the projections with me all week, and he was, he and Colin were caping up for AJ Green. Like he just played 86% of the snaps, 90% target share, and I was like, you know what? Like for once, I'm gonna play the old guy. Like I'm gonna play and just punished immediately.
Yeah.
The weird thing is DeAndre Hopkins got those 15.4 points on the first drive, and that was it. He was not only did he not catch the ball again, he was not targeted again in that game, which was so bizarre. And then would have felt really good about swapping into Derrick Henry, but did not laterally make that move.
Yeah, some of the swaps that we made, we were feeling great. Same thing. We ended up moving, I think, a Dak team to Kyler and Nuke, and I think we did have Rondale on that team. Our bring back was, I'm trying to remember, I think it actually was Thielen. So we're like, oh my God, we just swapped to the literal nuts. And then Nuke didn't really do anything the rest of the game, and then Derrick Henry breaks the slate completely. So that was rough. My Derrick Henry exposure was basically ruined because it was in a lot of Russell Wilson stacks, and what would have obviously been the nuts is just having a mini stack with Lockett and Henry coming back. So didn't quite luck out, I guess, enough to have those pieces in the right spot. But I feel really good about some of the ownership that I got, even on Dallas guys that I ended up leaving in some teams that weren't completely dead. So like I think I ended up getting Dak and the monster at like sub 10%. CD obviously was like over 20, but even Amari was like at 11%. So like clearly the higher you get up in some of these buy-in levels, like people are swapping, right? It's like one of those things that like we didn't see it as drastic even a couple years ago, but now, man, like Dak in that type of spot, like sub 10%, like that had to have been people swapping, right?
Yeah, and which is funny because like people are like, so the Cooper Cup example is not great because very rarely is there going to be a guy that owned at that malleable of a price. Like maybe Tyreek goes for 40 in the early slate,
Yeah.
but Tyreek at 40 at 8,400, that's what he cost this upcoming week against the Chargers. Like that's a spot where like, I don't know, 40 at 8,400, like that's really good for a bink, but depending on what kind of 3K guys you have to play to make it work.
Yep.
But Cooper Cup was like he was free,
Right.
and so that's like a really different thing. So I wonder if knowing how much the field is going to be swapping, if it's going to be like people are going to kind of like level themselves, like, oh, I had a bad start, so I'm off the chalk late game. But like maybe your start wasn't that bad. Like for example, just theoretically, if you only had Najee yesterday, gets like 19 points or whatever, and you were like, you know what? I feel like Najee at whatever he was owned, it's not great. So I am swapping off of the Cowboys game and onto a different game. Now the Cowboys game ended up being bad, right? So Dak doesn't pay off. Amari has a terrible game. CD has like a decent game, but you're not binking with him. But if that game does go nuts and Dak is 9% owned and Lamb is 20%, and you could have played him with Cedric Wilson or Dalton Schultz, and let's say one of those guys scores. Mike Williams has like the huge game. Like I don't know. I wonder if ownership is going to get a little bit more flat and people are going to be kind of like leveling themselves out of good teams.
It's possible. And I do think that this slate was like very unique because sometimes we'll have these afternoon games where it's like one clear spot. And yes, like this Chargers and Dallas game was a very like impressively, I guess, high paced, high point kind of projection type of game, but there was like easy pivots, right? Like you could talk yourself in to the Tennessee and the Seattle game very easily. You could talk yourself in to some Tampa Bay, and obviously if anything happens with Atlanta, that's good. That'd be great at this point. But man, what do you make of like all the Cordero Patterson we saw yesterday, man? Like same kind of thing. Like do we just completely X out Mike Davis at this point too? Like this is just really tough scene for like these guys past the first, I guess, second round in regular fantasy, right?
Well, I already
so down on him. It doesn't even matter.
Well, yeah, I was already like, no, Mike Davis for me. I am like a little bit interested in the CP thing. I mean, he was like not very efficient as a runner like he was in the first game. He actually was really efficient in that game against the Eagles, and then I think he had 7 for 11. But I mean, this is just an offense so desperate for playmakers, right? Russell Gage, not it. Olamide Zaccheaus, not it. Like those dudes are not going to be doing it. So he is like their one guy, right? So Ridley does his thing. Pitts is still learning. He had that one amazing catch yesterday. And I think that Pitts is going to end up being like pretty good. And I think he'll kind of like Justin Jefferson, where he came on as the season, or actually more like AJ Brown, where he started out and really came on as the season went on. But I mean, if you were their coaching staff and you're watching game film on Monday morning, like you're going to be like, okay, well, Mike Davis is literally doing nothing. Like we need to get Patterson the ball more. I think that's obvious.
Yeah, there was a moment in time yesterday in the afternoon where the only person that had scored more points than Cordero Patterson at the running back position was Christian McCaffrey, and it was like 1 point more. So Tony Pollard ended up beating McCaffrey, and then Derrick Henry obviously doubles everyone up. So I guess weird week in some ways at running back, but I guess goes to show you that some of these guys' roles aren't as secure as we thought they were. It's very early in the year, all that good stuff. So Davis, one kind of key takeaway from week 2, if you had to narrow all this chaos down to one thing, do you think it is like I guess lessons that you learned in late swap, or was there something else like a little bit more specific that you want to leave us with?
So I mean, I guess like the value in late swapping to 4% owned dudes is like it just always remains good, right? Tyreek in week 1, Derrick Henry in week 2. Those are just, it's always just going to be a good idea to like have those swaps in mind and to be actively pursuing them. The other thing is like a more micro note is Joe Mixon just saw 100% of the touches in the Bengals backfield, or I think Pirine was targeted once. And like, I know the Bengals have been kind of bad. Chase has been good. Higgins has been good, but like they're not that inspiring or whatever. But if this Mixon usage is going to continue, like this has got to be a guy that you got to pound at. I mean, he was like not owned at all in yesterday's slate, and like that usage is like Kamara, McCaffrey-esque. Not quite as many targets in the passing game, though. I think that stuff is going to open up for the Bengals because Burrow has thrown 27 and 30 passing attempts. I think those might end up being his lowest totals of the year as he just gets a little bit more comfortable. And also he threw 3 interceptions, which I, again, don't think he will be throwing 3 interceptions all that often.
I'm with you, man. The Joe Mixon just makes me completely sick because that was one of like my contrarian early running backs that just didn't quite work out, but the usage was there. Like you said, like there's not many people that were seeing more touches and definitely not more snaps than Joe Mixon last week. He just didn't completely get there.